I've been wanting to do a video on kids and gaming for a long time, and I've been trying to figure out the best way to do it. And it may be more than one video, but this is obviously just the one. I think that as a gamer and as a parent, it is a challenge these days to get kids into gaming. And I don't think there's one way to do it. I don't think there's one type of kid that's going to be more or less successful as a gamer. But I do think that there are a lot of games out there that now are kid oriented and offer a lot of inroads toward gaming and a lot of gateway games to get kids into gaming. Whether they stay as gamers or not, I think unfortunately you can't really control that as a parent. I have two kids, and my older one was a great gamer, sort of between the ages of 8 and 11, and does not game at all now. And I've now cycled in the second kid. I'm doing my best to inculcate her into the world of gaming and to combat all the other types of entertainment options that are out there for her. And the games that I'm going to present in this video, there's 3 of them, are, in my estimation, excellent games to use with kids to show them aspects of the hobby and to engage them and to hopefully give them a sense of wanting to play again. And part of what our challenge is as parents, if we're trying to do this, is to get kids to, see something like this and be really excited about it. And when that is competing with other forms of media and other forms of gaming, video gaming, Minecraft is, of course, a big thing with kids, it can be hard. In my opinion, it doesn't have to be either or. My kids do gaming on devices as well as board gaming, and I don't have a problem with that at all. I think if you try to restrict one in favor of the other, you're not going to have success in the long term. But the other point I want to make is that the games that I'm presenting here are really suitable for sort of ages 8 and up, these 3 games. I think to get kids interested in gaming and to present a platform for them of gaming as a hobby, as a lifelong hobby that they can have in some degree or another, you need to start well before the time they're 8. And what I have always done with my kids, I'm really not into playing like the kids games that are designed specifically for 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. I will do it, but it's work in a way. I think that as a gamer, I have lots of cool stuff lying around. Like I brought these things out because these were, I don't remember what game they're from, but these are highly interesting to 4 and 5-year-old kids. That if you leave your game components out, I had my kids rolling my dice for Descent back, when they were 3, 4, 5 years old. I think that is a way of showing them they're going to be interested in a lot of things at that age. And if you get them interested in components of your games that you have, that you're playing, I think that's a great thing to do. And then, of course, playing the games that are designed for them brings them joy too. You don't want to just be having them living in a kind of grim, dark world of your gaming, but letting them play with components, letting them roll the dice, letting them sort out the pieces or put away the cards or whatever it is they like to do, I think lays the groundwork for showing them that gaming components can be engaging and involving. So with that said, this video highlights 3 games that I think show an array of different gaming mechanics as well as genres of gaming that are pretty foundational to exploring the hobby as a whole, and I think have a great deal of success with children and children's engagement. So the first game I want to take a look at in this video is Creature Comforts. This is a game by Roberta Taylor with art by Shauna J.C. Tenney, and The art is a big component of this game in terms of its appeal for players and kids and grown-ups alike. It is a game of deciding how to outfit your family's den, I should say. You play as a family of forest critters. You are trying to gather and harvest all sorts of creature comforts before the winter arrives. Nominally speaking, it is a worker placement game, and I say nominally speaking because in this game, the placement of your workers, in this case, various family members, does not prohibit another person playing the game from going to that spot. So while it is a game that can be played competitively, and I guess essentially is a competitive based game in terms of who scores the most number of points at the end of the game by outfitting their home the best. It is not a competitive game in that you are taking away options and resources directly from the other player. There's not really player-to-player conflict. I suppose in here, this is essentially the market, the Owl's House, where you can purchase cards. If another player has purchased a card, then it would not be available to you, at least then. In the multiplayer game, the card deck has very many copies, I think 4 copies of each card. So even if someone took the soup, for example, that you wanted, another soup would come up potentially eventually. The way I have been playing it with my kid is we are basically playing against the game, and it's a victory point based game. So there's a score sheet at the end that's pretty cleverly done, and I'll show you that later. That's actually a big selling point to her in terms of trying to achieve a better score, because the score is, well, I'll just show you now. So here we can look at the end and see, so instead of just getting a score, you look at the different aspects of your score, add them up, and then you get a little value. So for example, the last time we played, we ended up we were the well-stocked creatures of the village, I think is where we ended up. We got about 61 points. And she really likes that. She loves looking at the chart and reading it. And you could see just the detail here with the art, making it extremely inviting for kids. And the aspects of this game, so let me just step back a minute and explain. What you're doing is you are traveling around the village, or the meadow here, the area here, to place your individual characters to do different things. You could purchase a creature comfort, which you will then need to get resources to actually quote unquote build. So to actually get soup in your den, you have to get 2 grains and 2 mushrooms. And then there are various places you can go, for example, that will give you those resources if you have the proper dice placement. So there's a dice placement mechanism, there is a worker placement mechanism, and then there are choices to make about how you are going to manage getting the values, the highest values to score. So for example, with a pot of tea, if you successfully complete your pot of tea with your 2 apples and your coin, you will score 4 points at the end. You'll get +2 points if you also have the rocking chair. Now, for example, this is an end game of ours where we were able to get a couple of board games that gave us a +1 for each other board game we had. We got this mandolin, which we got. We also had the flute, which gave us +2 because we had the mandolin as well. We got a pantry where we were getting additional values by going around, very thematic, and scavenging for other things to put in our pantry. This square card is an upgrade that we did to our den, and the upgrades can be purchased here along the side, also with dice placement. They operate slightly differently in that they give, in many cases, an ongoing benefit or change to the game state as the game is played, in addition to victory points that they give. And we'll take a look here at this was the home that we were working with. At the outset of the game, you have these values covered with little houses, and as you purchase those permanent upgrades, you remove one, so you're getting an additional victory point benefit the more permanent upgrades you make to your home. We also ended up with some preserves, which gave us a benefit with the pantry. Again, very thematic. And we had a quilt and some socks. Just taking a look at some of the other cards here. Piggy bank is a great one because you can try to score additional money for saving money and coins that you get. The coins can be found, there's a river here, and you can scavenge in the river as one option to get them. And sometimes these are variable cards that come out to offer different things depending on how the season is going. And this is also going to change in terms of who is at the store each round of the game. You will have a different shopkeeper who has different benefits and different options for you to do. So it's randomized in that way. You don't necessarily know, well, you definitely don't know what's coming, and each round of the game, it is going to be something different. Looking further at the benefits, the comforts, you can get pie, some candles, you can get a bookshelf, and there are books in the game as a resource, so you will get additional victory points for the books that you are managed to store there. Some ice skates, which you get a benefit if you have the socks. Now, we had the socks, but we never got those ice skates. And there is that rocking chair. There's another board game that's in here, and some toys, a fairy garden, and you can get a lot of victory points if you get a set of all the resources, and the hearth and the muffler. Those are that's the extent of the unique cards in the game. And the one downside, I'd say, to playing solo the way we are is that you are instructed to remove duplicate cards in the game for solo play. And there are so many duplicates that the deck you end up with is kind of thin. I wish there were more unique items to make the variety in solo play a little bit greater. But nevertheless, I did add in, I think you're not supposed to, but I added in a couple of board games so that we had the opportunity potentially to get this extra benefit. And as it turned out, we did, because those cards came up. But the benefit of this game, I think this game offers a lot of benefits for kids. First of all, it is just conceptually the idea that you are nesting and you have this family of animals. You're really supposed to be playing with 4 of the same animal, but since we're playing solo, we chose to make our family a diverse family of animals, and so we chose one of each type. But if you were playing as it is intended, you would either have like 4 rabbits or 4 hedgehogs or 4 foxes or 4 squirrels. Oh, they're all of the same color, but we like to play this way. It's more colorful, and the art, the feel of the game goes very well with the theme of what you're trying to do. That going around and making decisions about where you're going to place your characters, and then there is the random factor in terms of the dice that you roll. So the way it works is there's cooperative dice that are called village dice that are rolled by everybody. But for the purposes of explaining how this game works, I'm going to use the materials as they are meant to be. It's got a really cool concept of village dice, which are used by everybody who's playing the game, and what's called family dice, which are used only by you. And in a multiplayer game, what happens is you are rolling the village dice first, and these values are used by everybody playing the game in getting the resources. So for example, if you had a worker here, to get the 2 mushrooms and the log, you would need to place dice that totaled 5 or lower. Everybody would be able to use the village dice, and then each player rolls their own family dice, and those values are only for them. So for example, in this case, if we had a worker placed here, we would be able to use one of this and our family dice to get these benefits because that worked with the total. Another player, perhaps, who didn't have this low value would not be able to do that if they couldn't come up with the appropriate value here. But for solo, you're still using these 4 dice. You're rolling the village dice first, then looking at those values, you are placing out your characters, making a bet on what you will be able to do or not do, and then you're rolling your family dice and using those values to complete the actions that you have chosen by your worker placement. I will say that in the solo game, at least the ones we've played, it's pretty rare that you're not able to complete an action that you want to do because you don't have the right combination of values. Because there are a couple of spots like this one that lets you trade things and this one that lets you get cards where any value can work. So the game is pretty forgiving in that way. Mostly you are able to do what you want to do in terms of getting the right values to complete the actions. And if you don't, if you have a worker placed somewhere and no appropriate die to let them complete that action, you get this bandage token. And the bandage token can be used in one-time use only in future turns to add or subtract a value from one of your dice in a future turn. So you're not completely lost. And in fact, there is a strategy that my daughter has picked up on where to try to get one of those, you might place a worker somewhere where you're not likely to complete the action so that you do get one of those for the next turn. So for example, this action is going to take 3 dice that will total 6 or lower. You only have any time you're working with the game, you only have this set number of dice. So you might run out of dice, and if you had a worker here, you would get a token here if you ran out of dice and couldn't complete that. So she sort of figured out how to game the system in that way, and that's a legitimate strategy for the game. The decision making in the game is pretty light. I mean, you do need to try to maximize your points, obviously, and look and see what is likely for you to be able to do based on how many cards are left in the game, how many turns are left in the game. You know that there are 8 turns in the game represented by these cards that change every aspect of a turn and reveal new resources. So you're sort of able to plan out to some extent what you're doing. I think for kids, there's a concept of card management or hand management that comes into play because you can only ever be building or working on completing 3 cards in your hand at a time. So you do need to make some choices if you see what is available in the market, for example, and what you're building with the resources that you have, maybe switching one out or not. So that comes into play. Obviously, the worker placement comes into play. There is a little bit of sort of push your luck or determining risk in the sense of you don't know all the full values of the dice before you have to place your workers. You know most of them, but you don't know all of them. So you may be placing your worker into a space where ultimately it can't be successful, but that's a risk you have to take. So there's a little bit of risk management in there too. And then, of course, there is the scoring and the adding up of the values at the end can serve as a primer in basic edition. There is a score track here at the end that, on the flip side of your home card that can make it a little bit easier to track, but there's a lot of addition. And my family rule with gaming with my kids has always been, if you can't add up the points, you don't get the points. So there is a little bit of basic mathematics at the end. And I think overall the combination here of the theme, the idea of what you're doing, the art just does a lot to kind of bring it home, no pun intended, in terms of it being a comforting, gentle game. And you do get the sense like you're building up your lair, your nest with all these nice things for the winter. It really, really works together as a package. Depending on the reading level of your child, it says 8+. I would agree with that. You could play this, I think, with a younger child with some help so that you are helping make some of the decisions, and there's not a lot of reading involved. So if you have a child who's not a strong reader, that would not impact the gameplay for this game. The rulebook itself is very clearly laid out, and I think if you do have, a reader in the family, I think it's capable to be read and understood by an 8-year-old in terms of setting up the game and understanding the basic concepts. But of course, it's always nice to have some parental help. And I find with my kids over the years, what has been the most successful is kind of the two of us banding together against the game, as it were, and having a kind of cooperative play with the two of us, figuring out how to play the game. And then as whoever I'm playing with, understanding of the game improves, then I let them take more of the lead in the decision making and the strategy making as they feel comfortable with it. So that's a look inside Creature Comforts. It's a really great game for kids in terms of worker placement, card management, a pleasant theme, a perfect marriage of the theme, the mechanics, the art, and it's gentle and it's quick. It plays very quickly. The back of the box, I think, says 60 minutes or more. Now, that would maybe be true if you're playing with like 4 people and some of them were kids taking a while. But if you're playing this with, as I was, with like one kid and you're helping them, I think you could play a game in a half an hour easily, maybe even slightly less. And in terms of co-op gaming, Horrified by far, I think, is my choice for kids and getting them into understanding what it means to play a cooperative game with multiple characters, as well as characters that have variable powers. So in this game, I'm not going to go through what the game is. You probably know it's quite a popular game, but in case you don't, you are playing a series of heroes who are defending a village from characters, in this case, in popular quote-unquote universal monsters. So we have Frankenstein and his bride and the Invisible Man in this case. And what the game does, it is inherently a co-op game, and you are working with one or more heroes to take actions and to fulfill the specific requirements that each monster has. There are different requirements to defeat the monsters before the terror track goes to the end or time runs out, and time run out when the monster cards are used up. And you can see here my daughter made a note, we're in the monster phase when we resume. In any case, the game really teaches a couple of important fundamentals, I think, for being a lifelong gamer. And the first, of course, being cooperation, and built into the game itself in terms of actions. These are the available actions. And of the available actions, you can see that this one, share, is explicitly cooperative, as well as this one, guiding a villager, is, while not cooperative with another player, it is cooperative in the sense of picking up a character, essentially an NPC that may come into the game, and helping them get to where they want to go, and then getting a reward for it. So built into the actions of the game are positive things like that, and also the necessity for dividing up tasks, because you will be forced to be running around the village and picking up various items that you need to fulfill requirements in various ways for defeating the monsters. And it's impossible to be too many places at once. So working with your fellow gamers to plan out what actions you're going to take based on perhaps your specific special actions and strengths, as well as your position on the board, is inherent to gameplay and is necessary in order to succeed. The other thing that it does teach is the fact that there can be games with variable power players, so that each character in this game offers something different to the gameplay. Now, in terms of following the rules of the game, you're meant to select your character randomly, turn these over and just choose them randomly. But what we do is we try to form a team that we think will complement each other. So if we're playing just two characters, we will try to get a team that will work well together. In this case, we have the inspector and the professor, and we are fighting off against the Invisible Man and the Bride and Frankenstein. And so far, we've done a lot to get rid of the Invisible Man, and we're still working on Frankenstein and the Bride, but our terror level nothing's really happened. So far it's been pretty easy. This is a game with some luck in it, depending on how items come out onto the board, because they are randomly distributed, and you may need an item that doesn't come out when you need it, or whatever. You could be, right now we're waiting around for items to show up at the mansion, for example, and there's not much we can do about that until they do show up. So there's randomness in this game. Of course, it is a light game, and I tend to think of randomness and lightness going hand in hand to some extent, at least to the extent of not being annoyed by the randomness. It's meant to be a kind of kick back your heels, kind of not too serious game, and you can see that from the art. Now, you may have a child who is afraid of some of the art, and in this case, my daughter does not like this character, the creature from the Black Lagoon. We played this character, but she finds that art not great, but she can deal with it. On the other hand, she refuses to play against the Wolfman because she finds that too scary. So if you have a sensitive child to visual things, that may be an issue. But overall, the visual look of this game is something that is appealing, I think, to just in general, but to kids as well. It's bright. It has a recognizable style that's like cartoon adjacent, and I think doesn't take itself too seriously in that respect. So for those reasons, to me, Horrified is the game that is one that can bring kids along. It also scales with difficulty. So depending on the types of monsters you choose, as well as how many of them you place into the game, you could be facing off against 4 monsters, for example, or you could be facing off against 2 monsters that have easier win conditions. Right now we've got one, I think this is medium and easy, or maybe they're both medium. But you can scale the difficulty of the game as your child gets older, as your child gets more skilled in the game itself and in the management of the gaming mechanics. So for all of those reasons, I think Horrified is my number one choice for teaching cooperation in games, for understanding something about playing with different characters that bring something different to the game. And as such, it's a foundation for a lot of other kinds of games that they might want to play as they get older. And of course, it's impossible to do a video, at least for me, about kids and gaming without getting in a modular dungeon crawl. And for me, for kids, the best one to get them into it is Catacombs of Karak. This is an extremely simple game, and in a sense, it's the game that, of all I mentioned as a grown-up, it feels the most like a kid's game, but it does what it does very well for kids. I mean, down to the component quality, and it has these character sheets you can play. There's 7 playable characters. It has like these little ridged boards to put the pieces of the things that you collect, and it just does all the very basic elements of dungeon crawling well, and it makes good use of, these are a health token, and that's a wound. I mean, super clever, cute, and you've got the variable powers of the characters. So, for example, here, if you play this character, you get a double attack, and you can reincarnate yourself if you get completely wounded, and you can get sent back to a magic fountain. For example, we have essentially like a thief type of character here who can win ties in combat, and she can also avoid a monster and keep moving. And finally, here we're also playing with a wizard, and everybody can get a magic spell if they find it in a treasure chest, but they have to discard it after use, except the wizard can keep that spell. So that's how he gets a benefit, and he can also walk through walls, and that can come in handy as you build your dungeon. Other characters, let's see, who is this one? This is maybe like a cleric type. You can spend a health point to add +1 to your combat results. You can also switch places with somebody. So you can see the basic character tropes are here in kind of kid form, for lack of a better way of saying it. And the game has an extremely basic structure for combat. It's like a 2d6 you roll, and if you are greater than, here's an example of a low-level enemy, you will kill that enemy and get what they have to offer on the back. There's a draw bag that has the enemies in it. It's building a modular space, and there are different tiles. There are some special tiles that have impacts on them. I don't know if I'm going to find one, but you can see one here. And you're going through, there's a dragon, you're trying to defeat the dragon. It is not out of the box a co-op game. It is a competitive game to see who can do this first. However, now I'll take a look. Well, I'll just show you the rules here. The rules are pretty decent, and I would say, again, like an 8-year-old with average reading ability could read these rules probably and understand most of them. They're a little text heavy in terms of these are the characters descriptions that you get here, the different types of rooms and what they mean, and some examples of combat and what it means to win, to tie, how you can retreat in combat. So it is a little bit more complicated, I guess, than it. I mean, if you're an adult who plays a lot of dungeon crawls, it's not, but for kids it is. There is a curse token that I think we have misplaced into another game that you can get when you fight the mummy. So there's a little bit going on here that is elevated. The other thing that's cool about it, and I think for kids getting into the hobby is good to know about, is that there are some fan-made rules that are on Board Game Geek that we have printed out. So there's a solitaire play rule. The concept of having add-on rules, I think for kids getting into a hobby is something to integrate, to say like, hey, you have a game here and it can be played in other ways than is necessarily right out of the box. Recently on Board Game Geek, somebody else posted rules, I haven't yet printed them out, that add in some events and add in some random tables for things like the treasure chests and some other things that you can encounter in the dungeon environment, some of the special tiles. Well, there's another portal tile, but there are more than just these in terms of special tiles. So I need to print that out and see how I can make use of that. It sounds pretty cool to add that into the game. And of course, you could do that yourself. You could say with your kids, that, you can make a list of what is in the treasure chest, and then it could be a D6 list of things that they might find that once they know the game could benefit them in the game. And when you get a treasure chest, you could roll on that and decide that that's what you got. And you could have some proxy token that would represent that. And again, that aspect of gaming, if you're really, really trying to get kids into the hobby as it is beyond Scrabble and Monopoly and even Risk, that of course is part of the hobby, at least in my mind, working with game systems and realizing that they have some flexibility and can be permeable in that regard. So Catacombs of Karak has been one from the dungeon crawl perspective. The components are great. It covers kind of all the basics of having different actions you can take, movement, combat, finding treasure, finding weapons, having a base value added on to an attack, perhaps losing a weapon, injury, healing, locks and keys, and of course, spiders.